drove to my daughter's house that Thanksgiving morning with a pecan pie on the passenger seat and a voicemail I hadn't finished listening to. She'd called the night before just after 10. I remember because the news was on. Some weather system pushing down from Canada, temperatures dropping hard across the Midwest. Her voice on the message sounded careful, measured, the way she'd learned to speak after she married into that family. She said everything was fine, that she was just calling to confirm I was still coming, that she loved me. Then she said quietly at the very end, almost like she didn't want to say it at all, "Dad, I'm just tired." I replayed it twice in the parking lot of Kroger that morning before I went in to buy the butter I'd forgotten. I stood there in the cold with my phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something move through me. Not panic, something older than panic. Something a man feels when he's spent 31 years as a family court mediator, and he knows the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes, that I'm just tired doesn't mean tired. I put the butter in the cart. I bought the pie instead of making it because I was already running late. And I drove the 40 minutes to Millhaven with the radio off. My daughter's name is Claire. She's 34 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and her mother's way of laughing at something before she decides whether it's actually funny. Her mother passed 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It was the kind of loss that doesn't leave you. It just changes shape over time, the way a scar does. After that, it was just Claire and me. She married my son-in-law 3 years ago. His name is Preston, and the first time I met him, I thought he was exactly the kind of man I would have been relieved to introduce to my own father. Polite, well-spoken, quick with a compliment, he worked in commercial real estate. He had a firm handshake and always refilled your glass before you asked. His family had money, the quiet old kind that doesn't need to announce itself, a lake house in Wisconsin, a mother who wore pearls to brunch, a father who golfed 4 times a week and talked about it like it was a job. Claire seemed happy. I told myself she was happy. I was good at that for longer than I should have been. I turned onto their street at 11:47. I know the exact time because I checked it when I saw the cars. 4 of them, all lined up neat along the curb in front of the house. Preston's parents were already there, his sister and her husband. An uncle, I'd find out later, who'd driven up from Indianapolis. I parked and I sat for a moment. The house looked warm. Every window had that amber glow. Through the front curtain, I could see shapes moving, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of something I couldn't quite make out. Laughter, maybe, or a football game. The smell of wood smoke. A perfect American Thanksgiving. I got out of the car with my pecan pie, and I walked around the side of the house the way I always did, through the back gate. Because the last time I'd used the front door, Claire had laughed and told me I was too formal. The gate latch was cold, and it stuck the way it always did, and I pulled it hard and walked into the backyard. She was sitting on the back steps, not standing, sitting, on the concrete steps in the cold, without a coat. She had a thin cardigan pulled around her shoulders, the kind you wear inside, and she was sitting with her knees pressed together and her arms wrapped around herself. And when I came through the gate, she looked up at me and I watched her face do something I hadn't seen it do since she was small, and something hurt her, and she was trying to decide whether it was okay to cry in front of me. I set the pie down on the patio table without thinking about it. I crossed to her in 3 steps and I sat down beside her on that cold concrete and I put my arm around her. She was shaking, not dramatically, not the shaking of a crisis, the shaking of a person who has been cold for a long time and doesn't realize anymore that they're cold. "How long have you been out here?" I said. She said, "I don't know, a while." "Claire." I kept my voice even, the way I'd kept my voice even for 31 years when I was sitting across a table from people in pain. "Talk to me." She said Preston's mother had asked her to help set the table. And then when she put the centerpiece in the wrong place, a ceramic turkey his mother had brought from home, which apparently went in a specific spot that Claire hadn't known about, his mother had said, loudly enough for the room to hear. that she didn't know how Preston managed with someone so scatterbrained. Claire had apologized. She'd moved the turkey. But something in her chest had gone tight, the way it always did in that house, and she'd needed air, and she'd come outside and sat down and then just hadn't gone back in. "No one came to check on you," I said. "It wasn't a question." She shook her head. I looked through the back window of the house. I could see them in there. Preston's mother was perched on the arm of a chair, drink in hand, bright lipstick, perfectly composed. His father stood by the fireplace with Preston, both of them watching football with that loose, comfortable posture of men in their own world. His sister was laughing at something, tipping her head back, a fire in the fireplace throwing warm orange light across all of them. And my daughter was outside in a cardigan shaking. I want to be careful here because I know how I felt in that moment, and I know what I wanted to do, and what I actually did was different. What I wanted to do involved my voice at a volume I hadn't used in years. What I actually did was take off my coat, my good wool coat, the one Claire had helped me pick out 2 Christmases ago, and I wrapped it around her shoulders. And then I said, "Come on, you're not staying out here." She grabbed my hand. "Dad, don't make a scene." "I'm not going to make a scene," I said. And I meant it. I was 63 years old, and I had learned the difference between making a scene and making something very, very clear. I helped her up. I noticed, when she stood, how she moved, slowly, carefully. One hand pressed flat against the small of her back in a way that telegraphed pain. I'd noticed she'd been doing that more over the past few months. When I'd mentioned it, she'd said she was fine. I guided her inside through the back door. The room shifted when we came in. Not dramatically, no one gasped, but there was a beat of adjustment, the way a room adjusts when something enters it that disrupts the comfortable arrangement of things. Preston looked over from the fireplace. His mother turned from her chair. His sister stopped mid-laugh. I said pleasantly, "She was outside without a coat. It's 38 degrees. Preston's mother smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it doesn't need to. "Oh, Claire loves fresh air," she said. She's always been so dramatic about needing space. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, still pleasantly, "I'm going to get Claire some warm tea and we're going to sit down. I'd appreciate it if someone could bring her coat from wherever it is." No one moved. I got her coat myself from the hook by the front door. I made her tea in her own kitchen from the good chamomile she kept in the cabinet above the stove. I sat with her at the kitchen table while the sounds of the Thanksgiving gathering continued in the next room like we were a separate country. And while I sat with her, she talked. Not all at once, in pieces. The way people talk when they've been holding something too long and they finally have somewhere to put it. She told me about the centerpiece, which I already knew. But then she told me about the week before, when Preston's mother had called to tell Claire which dishes she'd be making for Thanksgiving, not asked, told, and when Claire had said she'd already planned the menu, there'd been a silence on the line, and then Preston's mother had said, "I just think it would mean a lot to Preston if we did it right this year." She told me about the month before, when she'd had a bad week at work. She's a physical therapist. She's good at her job. She's careful and dedicated, and she'd come home to find that Preston's parents had stopped by unannounced and were still there, and Preston's mother had spent the visit subtly pointing out things in the house she thought needed updating, and when they left, Preston had said Claire should try not to be so sensitive. She told me about what the doctor had said 12 weeks ago, that she was pregnant. I put down my mug. She said she'd told Preston right away, that he'd been happy, genuinely, she thought. But when they'd told his parents 2 weeks later, his mother's first response had been to say that Claire really should think about her stress levels and that this family has a history of complications with first pregnancies. Claire had smiled through it, but afterward in the car, when Claire had cried, Preston had said she was overreacting. "He always says I'm overreacting," she said. She was 11 weeks along. She was 34 years old. She was sitting in her own kitchen, shaking from the cold of having sat outside on her back steps for 40 minutes, while her in-laws laughed by the fireplace, and her husband watched football, and no one, not one person, had come to check on her. I am not a man who cries easily. My profession trained me out of it, or maybe it was just the years, or maybe it was losing my wife. But I sat there at that table and I felt something crack open in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. I said, "Does he know you're pregnant and still lets this happen?" She said, "He doesn't think anything's happening." That was the part that stayed with me. Not the cold, not the centerpiece, not even the mother-in-law's smile. The part that stayed with me was that Preston genuinely did not see anything wrong. That was not the blindness of a bad man pretending. That was something that had been built carefully over time, a framework in which Claire's feelings were always the variable that needed adjusting, never the circumstances. I've mediated enough family cases to know what that framework looks like and where it leads. I squeezed her hand. I told her she wasn't alone. I told her that we were going to figure this out together. And then I told her I needed to use the restroom, which was true. And while I was walking down the hall toward the bathroom, I took out my phone and I did something that 31 years of professional caution had trained me to do on instinct. I opened the voice memo app and I started recording. I walked back into the living room. I positioned myself near the fireplace where the conversation was happening, and I let the recording run in my shirt pocket. And then I did what I do. I asked questions. Easy, friendly, Thanksgiving questions. How's the development project going? How was Wisconsin this summer? Oh, you redecorated the living room. What made you go with that color? And because people like Preston's family are fundamentally comfortable, because they have never had reason to fear a question, they answered. They told me, in small offhand comments, across 37 minutes of recorded conversation, they told me everything I needed. Preston's mother mentioned twice that she'd had a word with Preston about Claire's tendency to catastrophize. His father said, with the kind of chuckle that men use to disguise the serious things they're saying as jokes, that Claire's got to learn that this is how this family operates. Preston's sister said that she thought it was actually really good for Claire to be pushed a little. She's very sheltered. And Preston himself, my son-in-law, who was standing 4 feet from me with a drink in his hand, said that he'd been pretty upfront with Claire about the adjustment period. I thanked them for having me. I went back to the kitchen, kissed my daughter on the top of her head, and told her I'd call her in the morning. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. I am a family court mediator. I have spent my career in the space between people who are hurting each other and don't fully know it yet. I know the difference between conflict and pattern. I know the difference between a rough patch and a structure. What I had witnessed in that house was not a bad holiday. It was a demonstration. Not deliberate, not performed, just simply revealed of exactly how my daughter's life had been organized without her fully understanding the organizing principle. I called my old colleague the next morning. She's a family law attorney now, one of the best in the county, and she's known me for 22 years. I told her what I'd seen and what I had on tape. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Send me the recording." I also called Claire's OB's office. Not to interfere, Claire had given me blanket permission to contact her doctors after her mother died, a permission she'd never revoked. I spoke to the nurse and I asked, carefully, whether stress had been noted as a concern at any of Claire's prenatal visits. The nurse said she couldn't share details. I told her I was Claire's father and I was concerned for her safety. There was a pause, and the nurse said, "I'd encourage you to have her come in this week." That was enough. The weeks that followed were not a movie. I want to be clear about that. There was no single confrontation where everything shattered. It was quieter and longer, and in some ways harder than that. Claire had 3 conversations with Preston that I know of, real ones, the kind she'd been avoiding, and in each of them he responded the way he'd been conditioned to respond, which was to explain to her why her perception was incorrect. But something had shifted. She wasn't moving her feelings to accommodate his framework anymore, and he could feel that, even if he couldn't name it. She moved out on a Tuesday in January. I drove the truck. We took 3 loads. I want to say it was easy and clean and righteous. It wasn't. She cried the whole first week. She second-guessed herself constantly, the way people do when they've spent years being told their instincts are wrong. I sat with her through it. I brought soup. I watched bad television with her. I didn't tell her what to do because she wasn't a child and she didn't need a father telling her what to do. She needed a father who would sit still while she figured it out herself. The attorney filed the paperwork in February. Preston's mother called me once in March, 3 weeks after the filing. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was very composed and very controlled and said that she hoped I understood that families go through difficult periods and that she was sure with some time and perspective, Claire would see things more clearly. She said she genuinely cared about Claire's well-being. I never called her back. My attorney, because she'd become mine too, in a sense, as the person who'd first connected Claire with counsel, told me the recorded conversation was admissible as context in the proceedings. Not a slam dunk, she said, but context, a record. A picture of a pattern corroborated by Claire's own account and by the medical notes that the OB had ultimately included in Claire's file about elevated stress and anxiety. Preston contested nothing about the baby. He said he wanted to be involved. I believed him actually, not because he was a good man, but because the baby was something his mother had wanted, and he had spent his entire life doing the things his mother wanted. What he didn't contest either was the separation agreement that Claire's attorney drafted, which included a clause about decision-making over the child's medical care and a specific provision about which relatives had unsupervised contact during the first year. Preston's mother had no veto over my grandchild's life. It was written down and signed and dated. Claire's daughter was born on a Wednesday in June at 7:14 in the morning at Mercy General. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, all the fingers, all the toes. The loudest, most insistent cry I have ever heard, and I have heard a lot of crying in my career. I was in the waiting room. I'd driven Claire in at 3 in the morning when her contractions were 6 minutes apart, and I'd held her hand until they took her back, and then I'd sat in a plastic chair and I'd drunk 4 cups of terrible coffee, and I'd done something I hadn't done in a long time, which was pray. When the nurse came out and told me, I stood up so fast I knocked my coffee cup off the chair. They let me in. Claire was exhausted in the way that makes a person look both broken and absolutely solid at the same time, and she had this small, red-faced, furious creature on her chest as she looked up at me and said, "Dad, come meet her." I walked over. I looked down at my granddaughter, and I thought about that Thanksgiving morning, the cold steps, the thin cardigan, the 38 degrees, the fire through the window and the laughter and the 4 cars lined up at the curb. I thought about my wife who would have been in that room with me and wasn't. I thought about the voice memo on my phone, which I'd kept, which was still there, and which I hoped I would never need again. My granddaughter opened her eyes. Not really, newborns don't focus. Not on the first day. But she turned toward my voice when I said her name, which Claire had told me the night before, which I turned over in my mind the whole drive to the hospital. Her name is June. I am 63 years old. I have spent 31 years helping families pull themselves back from the edge of breaking. I know things I wish I didn't know about what families are capable of doing to the people inside them. I know that the damage is rarely dramatic. It's usually quiet. It usually sounds like someone saying you're overreacting, or that's just how this family is, or she's always been so dramatic. It sounds like a voice on the other side of a window while someone you love sits outside in the cold. I know that the most important thing I have ever done in my career, more than any agreement I've mediated, more than any settlement I've helped craft, was sit down on a cold concrete step on Thanksgiving morning and put my arm around my daughter. She didn't need me to fix it. She needed to know she wasn't invisible. June is 4 months old now. She has Claire's eyes. She has, I swear to God, my wife's exact expression when something displeases her, a very specific squint of concentrated judgment that I find absolutely devastating in the best possible way. Claire is okay. She's better than okay on the good days. On the hard days, she's still okay, just quieter, more careful. She's back at work 3 days a week, and her patients love her and her colleagues say she's the best one on the floor. She started running again. She started laughing the way she used to laugh, the way that comes out before she decides whether something's funny. Preston sees June on alternating weekends, per the agreement. He shows up on time, and he is, from what Claire says, gentle with her. I take that as the minimum. I will take the minimum for now and hope for more over time. His mother has not called again. I still have the recording on my phone. I backed it up twice. I keep it not because I need it anymore. I don't think I'll need it anymore, but because I learned something a long time ago in my work, which is that people who are used to not being seen will sometimes try to become invisible again the moment the attention shifts. The recording is my way of remembering what I saw, a record that it happened, that she was real and cold and outside and I was there. I drive out to Claire's new apartment every Sunday. I bring groceries, usually, or just coffee, and I sit in her kitchen and she tells me about her week. And June sleeps in the other room, and I think about how much lighter the air is in that apartment than it was in the house in Millhaven. I can't explain that scientifically. It's just something a person feels. Last Sunday, she made biscuits from scratch, the recipe her mother used to make, the one I thought she'd forgotten. She slid a plate across the table to me and said, I looked it up. I was pretty sure I remembered it right. I took a bite. She watched me with that look, that question. I said, your mother would have said you nailed it. She smiled. First before she decided if it was funny, and then because it was. That's enough. That's more than enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to protect someone, not in the dramatic sense, not the way it looks in movies, where someone stands up and delivers the speech and the room goes silent and the credits roll. I mean the real kind, the kind that doesn't feel like anything in the moment except just showing up. Sitting down, staying put. When I walked through that back gate on Thanksgiving morning and saw Claire on those steps, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. I had a pecan pie in my car and a feeling I couldn't name. What I did was the smallest possible thing. I sat down next to her. I put my arm around her. I didn't fix anything. I just made sure she knew someone saw her. That's where it started. Everything else. The recording, the attorney, the agreement, June being born on a Wednesday in June, with all her fingers and all her toes, and that magnificent furious cry, all of it came after that one small decision to stop pretending I hadn't noticed. And that's the part I keep coming back to, because for a long time I had noticed. Not everything, not the full shape of it. But I'd noticed that Claire's voice had changed in the years since she married into that family. I'd noticed how carefully she chose her words when she talked about her in-laws. I'd noticed how she'd started saying, I'm fine, the way a person says it when they've given up expecting anyone to ask a follow-up question. I noticed, and I told myself I was probably reading too much into it because she was an adult and it wasn't my place, and maybe I was just a father who missed his daughter more than he wanted to admit. That's the thing about patterns of harm. They rarely announce themselves. They accumulate quietly in small moments that each seem manageable on their own. A comment about the centerpiece. A phone call that tells instead of asks. A husband who says you're overreacting one too many times until the person he's saying it to starts to believe him. None of it dramatic, all of it real. What I've learned, not just from Claire's story, but from 31 years of sitting across tables from families in pain, is that intelligence alone doesn't protect you from this. Smart people end up in these situations all the time. Claire is one of the sharpest people I know. What protects you is something harder to build and easier to lose, which is the ability to trust your own perception of events. To say, I felt cold. That was real. I was outside without a coat. That was real. The fact that someone told me it was fine doesn't make it fine. And the other thing is this. When someone you love is losing that ability, the most useful thing you can do is not argue with the person who's taken it from them. You can't outdebate a framework someone has spent years building. What you can do is sit down on a cold concrete step and be so plainly, undeniably present that the person next to you remembers what it feels like to be seen. Claire is rebuilding now. It's not fast, and it's not linear, and some Sundays when I drive out to her apartment, she seems completely fine, and some Sundays I can tell she's been crying, and we don't talk about it directly, we just drink coffee, and I let her set the pace. That's what resilience actually looks like, I think. Not bouncing back, not being fine, just continuing, just making the biscuits even when your hands are still shaking a little. June is 4 months old. She has no idea what any of this cost. I hope she never needs to know, but I also hope that someday, when she's old enough to understand, she'll know that the people who loved her showed up before she even arrived, that the groundwork was laid in the cold, on a Thanksgiving morning by a father who finally stopped pretending he hadn't noticed. That's the only legacy that matters to me now. Not what I built, what I didn't look away from,